Right. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our forum. The forum is putting a value on early childhood education. It's a really interesting forum, I hope, for everyone. The research we're looking at is research which PwC commissioned, and looks very much at the long-term benefits from investing in early childhood. And for many years we've had focus on participation rates as the benefits, particularly in women, obviously from investing in early childhood and education and care. But what this research I think does is give a broader view on that, and we're very excited to have with us three eminent guests here. James van Smeerdijk from PwC is the partner in charge of education, justice and human services. And he's really our host with the most information, so we hope to hear about the modelling from James. Professor Frank Oberklaid is the founding director for the Centre for Community Child Health at the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne and Professor of Paediatrics at the University of Melbourne. He's got a long history in this area, and we're very interested to hear how he sees this research fitting in the broader context. And we're very pleased to have Julia Davison. Julia is the CEO of Goodstart Early from Brisbane. So she's centred in Brisbane. I think Goodstart, obviously a national organisation. And the great benefit I think Julia's going to bring us is some reality from the coalface. So we're hoping to get some insights as well. All three are deep experts in this field, so we're inviting them just to discuss and talk about the research. For our viewers, it's available live now, but you'll be able to continue to look at the broadcast later on. So if for some reason you can't stay for us for the full period, we hope to broadcast for about 40 minutes. Feel free to come back to this link, and other parties will be promoting it out, so it'll be available here for future. So thank you very much, everyone. I was going to perhaps open up with a question to Frank, as the expert in the field on the data. What is the research broadly telling us, Frank, about early childhood?
Well, the research has been gathering strength, I guess, for the past couple of decades, and it sort of confirms what the Jesuits told us so many years ago, you know, give me a child until he's 7. We have a very, very strong, uncontested evidence base now about those early years. And to summarise it very quickly, what it says is that the years before a child goes to school are critical in shaping that child's functioning, cognitive, emotional, in every way. But just as importantly, builds a very strong foundation for the future. So if you project into adult life and look at some of the conditions that society grapples with, obesity, heart disease, stroke, diabetes, mental health problems, crime participation, welfare dependency, poor literacy, the list just goes on and on. It's a very diverse list. The evidence is starting to accumulate now. It's more than starting, it's been around for a while, but getting more robust. That the pathways to those problems in later life start in those early years. And so, even if you don't care about kids from a policy point of view and a economic and productivity point of view, it makes a lot of sense to invest very early on, and economists are sort of getting into that. So what the research says is that the environment in which a young child finds himself or herself in those first 3, 4, 5 years are critical, absolutely critical in shaping the brain. Where those environments are dysfunctional, for example, in situations of dysfunctional parenting or extreme poverty, or where there's substance abuse or exposure to violence or child abuse and neglect, that young child experiences a significant amount of stress in their environment, and persistently high levels of stress change the whole physiology system of the body. They reset the immune system, the cardiovascular system, the physiological systems at a different level. And that interferes very significantly with optimal brain development. So you can go back later in life and try and fix things up, but the evidence is very clear that biologically and economically it makes much more sense to get it right the first time than to go back later on and try and fix it up. So it really speaks to the importance of prevention, early intervention, and the foundations in those early years are extraordinarily important. The analogy I sometimes draw for lay audiences is any adult who's tried to pick up a skill late in life, whether it's learning another language or learning a musical instrument or trying to pick up a sport, you can do it, but it's hard. It makes much more sense to get it right the first time, because what happens over time is the plasticity of the brain decreases and it gets harder and harder to change. So if we really do want to make a difference to adult outcomes, to child outcomes, to education, we have to start early. That's a very powerful, uncontested message from the research.
Okay, well, thank you, Frank. Thank you very much for that. The science seems to be pretty compelling there. James, just switching to yourself. So James Smeerdijk from PwC sponsored the research, put it together. What made you look at this area? What was the gaps you saw that made you propose the research?
So PwC has been playing a role in early childhood for a couple of years now. We became very interested back in 2011 when we did an earlier thought leadership exercise in where we kind of looked at how the whole industry needed to change. And as part of that, when we looked at the research base, we found that really from an economic perspective, there wasn't much there. A little bit had been done around labour force participation. That is, if you have early childhood services that allows particularly women to play a bigger role in the workforce and the benefits from that. But there was very little else done in Australia around this, about what the Australian economic impacts would be. There was some reasonable work done overseas here and there around, I guess what Frank was referring to as the economic kind of case for investing early in people's lives, but it really hadn't been applied in Australia. So we thought, let's have a go at it. It's an important social issue. It's one that our skills could make a contribution to, and I think in the most powerful way was to try and put some numbers on the quality access effects of early childhood.
Right. Thank you, James. So we're aware broadly of the participation data because I think the Productivity Commission had modelled that and others had been looking at that data. But what were the other high-level insights then that came from this, if you like, long-term look at the benefits?
So what we, just to kind of, for those who are listening, just to give you a short, sharp understanding of what we did, we really measured three separate things. One was if you could get more people to participate in the labour force because of the easier availability of early childhood services, what effect that would have. And in that, our numbers are not dissimilar to those that have been recently produced by the Productivity Commission in their inquiry. However, we also looked at two other questions that the Productivity Commission really didn't look at closely and put a number on. One of them was, if you increase the quality of early childhood services, as governments are planning to do, what impact would that have on all kids who experience that higher quality impact? And the third thing we looked at is, if you look at the most disadvantaged and vulnerable in our community, and as Frank points out, that they have a disproportionate issue with their early brain wiring, getting it right early. If you extended access to quality early childhood to that cohort in particular, which is very unrepresented in quality early childhood services at the moment, then what impact would that have? And essentially, we came up with some numbers up to 2050, the impact on the economy. And for the workforce impact, it was around 6 billion cumulative to 2050. But what was really interesting was that the benefits of increased quality were up to 10.3 billion to 2050, and the benefits to GDP of increased participation of vulnerable kids was up to 13.3 billion. So in the long run, the effects of quality and access far outweigh the still significant effects of workforce participation. I should point out that this is in the long run, that obviously it takes some time for kids to mature and to realise their future educational possibilities and careers and become productive citizens, and so there's a lag period for some time, but it's a real number.
Right. Thank you, James, for introducing it. So the journalist in me says that's 4 times the benefit than what we had previously known. Now the benefit's been there, but we didn't have the Australian data, I suppose. It's quite a big number, in terms of the impact, and for policymakers and others looking at that sort of, where do we put our scarce fiscal dollars? That's a very significant insight that the return and benefits that come from investing in this sector are much more significant, particularly if you look at these long-run effects, and coupled, I think, with what Frank's observations are about the clinical and scientific observations. Julia, if I could come to yourself. So, Julia Davison, as we introduced previously, is the CEO of Goodstart, large organisation with lots of centres and with a very active role in policy and others. Welcome to have you here, Julia. Julia, you've got obviously ear to the ground, if I can call it that, and know the realities, and just wanted to pick up this theme of the quality proposition that James talked to. How would you describe the sort of quality story at the moment in terms of the current state of play in Australia around early childhood education and care?
Thank you for inviting me to participate. The sector's been undergoing a significant transformation over the last few years. So we describe it as moving beyond babysitting to high quality early learning. New national quality standards were introduced, which introduced ratios that are age specific and introduced requirements in terms of education, alongside a requirement for centres to run early learning programs consistent with the early years learning framework. And all of this is evidence-based, so somebody didn't just make it up one day. It's a national framework that we've all been working towards, and it's very transparent. There's an assessment and ratings process that's now well underway in all states and jurisdictions, and what we're seeing on the ground is some significant differences. So if I just take Goodstart, and at Goodstart we've got 13,000 staff. When we started, we had 2,000 staff with absolutely no qualification whatsoever, and we had around 100 plus early childhood teachers. We've now got over 750 early childhood teachers, and every single one of our staff has a qualification or is working towards a qualification. And that's really important, because what that means is that those people can provide high quality early learning environments that are actually going to make a difference to children's outcomes. You heard from Frank, the environments that children grow up in are absolutely significant and critical to their well-being and their development. And we know in particular that early learning settings can amplify children's home learning environments. So if there are things that they can't get in their home learning environment, they can often get them in early learning centres. And also where they have a very positive home learning environment, we can see further amplification, in particular when we have graduate teachers working in the centres. Right. And we know from the international research that this high quality makes a difference, and we're seeing from research around the world those countries where children have a larger number of years in early learning settings are getting better PISA results. So there's definitely a return on investment, but we're delighted that PwC have taken the opportunity to try and quantify that, and delighted to see the numbers that they're actually coming up with.
Right. Thanks, Janelle. Janelle, I think what I was hearing there was good progress so far, but some gaps. How would you summarise those gaps in the quality piece at the moment? If we're going to get these improvements, how do you think it's going to come on the quality side?
I think everyone's on a journey. We started these reforms a few years ago, and they're ambitious reforms in terms of the sort of transformation we're talking about in the sector. And we're talking about a sector that was very much focused on looking after children, caring for children, that is now actually focusing on education and care and an appropriate education for different age groups. So I don't want people to get me wrong. We're not talking about, you know, getting children aged 2 and sitting them in rows and showing them flashcards. We're actually talking about interactions between educators and children that help children learn. And we know, and again, Frank talked, we know that language development doesn't start just the year before school. It doesn't start in preschool. It starts well before that. So the more we can transform our early learning environments, the better. And as I said, we're on that journey. If we just look at the Goodstart centres, in the early days when our centres were assessed, about half of them met or exceeded the national quality standards. Now, if we look at our August results from our most recent assessments, 80% are meeting or exceeding. I think we're doing a little bit better than the sector in general, but the sector is moving and improving.
Right. So would I be fair to sum it as it's a consistency ambition at the moment, trying to get a real consistency right through the system is probably our first realistic aim in this quality area?
Yeah, it is, and we're well on that direction, but we're not yet at a point where every single state, despite being a national quality framework, where every single state has the same ratios. So there are new ratios to be introduced, new standards to be introduced.
Thank you. Yeah. Frank, I was going to just come back to you just to look at this question of the vulnerable children, and this quite startling number that James's research has revealed: 13.3 billion benefits up to 2050 from bringing what we call vulnerable children who come from lower socioeconomic areas, other disadvantage, into the system. Did that number surprise you? And is that consistent with your own, if you like, research and work from the hospital there in Melbourne?
Yeah, and not surprising at all. If there's any surprise, it's lower than I would have expected, even though I'm not an economist. I suspect that their figures were pretty conservative, as they should be. Now, it doesn't surprise me one little bit. So we have some other disturbing data. In Australia, this very prosperous country, 1 in 5 children arrives at school vulnerable in one or more areas of development, which suggests that they're going to be at risk of poor educational outcomes and all the consequences of that. In some communities, it's as high as 1 in 2. So what we're expecting teachers to do, what we're expecting schools to do, is to play catch-up, is to try and fix what has happened in those first 5 years, and it's a very, very challenging task. So the adult populations that are going to be heading for poor outcomes will be very largely derived from those kids who arrive at school in trouble. So, you know, Julia's right. The potential of high-quality childcare, high-quality preschool, high-quality early learning environments to make a difference is just profound. And if you just look at the research, it's really quite startling. We really shouldn't be having this debate. No one has a debate about whether expenditure on schools is worth it or not. No one's saying education for school-age kids is too expensive, we can't afford it. And when people say, oh, we can't afford to have a high-quality early learning professional task force, I say we can't afford not to. So it's not just the immediate environments that are important. Julia's very nicely summarised the importance of increasing quality in childcare and early learning settings. But you've got to remember that the childcare, the early years professional, is the professional that parents make contact with more than anybody else in those early years of life. That's even twice a day. They see the professional when they drop the kid off in the morning, and again when they pick them up at the end of the day. So we're just starting to realise the potential of those early years professionals to provide information to parents, to model for them, to pick up emerging issues and problems at an early stage, to refer early. So with a lot of these vulnerable kids, the first we know of their vulnerability is when they turn up at school. So in the years 2, 3, 4 years of age, when development is progressing so quickly, and the first clues as to things going off the rails are emerging, they're not making contact with the service system. So the very vulnerable don't use childcare, or if they do, use low-quality childcare. So you really do need a properly trained early years professional to have the confidence to be talking to parents, to have the confidence to be picking up problems. Now, we don't expect them to know what the problems are or even what to do about them. But a well-trained early years professional will notice this kid isn't quite right. You know, language is a bit delayed, or the way he or she relates to others isn't quite right, and will know that I better refer this child to somebody for a full assessment. So the vulnerability story is a very, very important one, and I suspect, if anything, PwC have underestimated the value, the additional return on that investment.
Yeah, let me ask that question then, James. You know, reading the modelling, which is very impressive. I think it's Jeff Dixon's model, is it, from Victoria Uni? You guys have taken that, but just on a question of the assumptions there, is the model relatively conservative in its approach?
This has been quite a difficult modelling task because you know, it hasn't really been done before in Australia, and we had to kind of start from scratch with making a whole lot of research and assumptions about, you know, what the shocks would look like, how they would ripple through the economy. So it's quite a difficult task, and I think when you're in a contentious area of public policy, you're always best to put a conservative number out there. We don't try and say that this number is the biggest number that you could produce. Indeed, what we tried to do was to be more conservative and take the lower bounds. Now that said, it's a difficult modelling task. It's highly uncertain. Perhaps that's why the PC chose not to try their hand at it. So yes, I think we've tried to be conservative. It's a difficult and complex modelling task. We've tried our best. What we have done is been as transparent as we can. If you look at our report, you'll find all of the assumptions clearly laid out. If anybody wants to pick a hole in it, all the information is there. It's a glass box, not a black box. The model we've actually used, you're right, is the Monash model, the MMRF model, which is basically a well understood and acknowledged model of the Australian economy to be able to look at these dynamic effects about how all parts of the economy interact with each other. It's the same kind of model that is used by Treasury departments around the country and the Commonwealth Treasury to look at things like what's the impact of mining tax, or what would the impact of a carbon tax be, tax reform, or major projects. So it's a very well understood and accepted modelling tool, and all the assumptions are there. I think, Frank, that they are on the conservative side. I'd like to point out though that it's not just about vulnerable kids. There's something for everybody, if you like, in this result. There's something in it for the economy in the short term through greater female labour force participation. There's something in it for all kids if we can ramp up qualities, not just the vulnerable kids. All kids can benefit from higher quality, but you know, I think it's important in a country like Australia that prides itself on its egalitarianism that there's something specially large in it for vulnerable kids. I think one of the things PwC has been thinking about lately is the economy is changing. It's changing into the knowledge haves and the knowledge have-nots, and that trend is accelerating. And we think it's really important that not only do we have investment in early childhood, but as well we have a big investment around science, technology, engineering, mathematics as well, so that we don't lock out kids from those really attractive futures. Right. But there's something in it for everybody.
Right. Thank you very much, James. And I think I might have misspoke. It's Peter Dixon, of course, not Jeff, who's the former Qantas chief. So, with apologies to both. Coming back, Julie, if I come back to the vulnerability question, the one we've been talking about, again, just from what you're seeing on the ground, your examples where access is improving. I'm interested in the anecdote almost. You know, the research suggests something. Is that your observation as well on the ground?
So, I mean, we're really pleased that PwC has modelled the benefits of increased participation for vulnerable children, as well as measuring the benefits for all children. Increasing access for children in more vulnerable circumstances is very important to us at Goodstart, and we have a large number of our centres in low socioeconomic areas. But before I go on and talk about an example on the ground that I want to share with you, I think it's important just to keep remembering that there are children in vulnerable circumstances in all communities, and Frank's been someone who's continually reminded us at Goodstart of that. But let me just share an example, and a sort of example that many of our staff, our educators, sort of deal with every day in some of our centres. We at Goodstart have been rolling out a program in centres where we've got more concentrations of children with high levels of vulnerability, and we've been partnering with the Benevolent Society on one of their early intervention programs. It's called Partnerships in Early Childhood, and what it's meant is we've been able to put a part-time worker with a background in infant mental health into one of our centres, and she's brought a completely different skill set, and she's been able to work with our own educators, and some of the things she's been able to do have been absolutely transformational. And the example I just quickly want to share with you is of twins, Sam and Sarah, 4-year-olds, who came to our centre with fetal alcohol syndrome. They were in permanent foster care, and for those of you who've dealt with children with similar issues, you'll know that some of the behaviours that educators have to deal with and the support that's required is actually very complex and quite challenging. In this particular case, a number of our educators came away on a regular basis with bruises, with furniture being thrown at them. Other children in the centre were scared. They used to hide under tables. The thing really was getting out of control until we brought this other worker in, and within a very short period of time, using that skills and expertise, she was able to work with the children, work with the family, work with the centre educators, and see what can only be described as a sort of transformational change in the children's behaviour, to the extent that they were able to participate in early learning activities, not every day all at once, but over a period of time, and to the extent now these children who were previously on a trajectory where they were going to be going to special schools, and goodness knows what else would or wouldn't have happened to them, they're now able to participate in the normal schooling system. So whilst we don't sit and do the maths in relation to individual children, it doesn't take much to actually start to think about the savings that actually can be made. And when you start to multiply that up, I'm not surprised about the sorts of numbers that James and his team have come up with. And like Frank, I think they probably are conservative, and I think it's just imperative in Australia that we recognise the difference that we can actually make, and that we start to invest in ensuring that these children and families have access, because these are the children and families that, whilst they potentially have the most to gain, they're the ones that are accessing our early years services the least.
And as a pediatrician, I'm clinic for kids that Julie's talk don't have the benefit of those early intervention programs. They arrive at school, learning problems, and how the child, my wish, if only we could have been. So whatever that Julia described extraordinarily cheap. Later on was challenging. So less likely to because the plasticity of brain. So just from an economic point of view, modelling,
Right. Thank you, Frank. You're breaking up a little bit there. That might be the internet, but I think we gathered the sentiment of it, certainly from a clinical perspective. So thank you for that. I'll come back to that. Just wanted to focus a little bit, and this is probably a question for us all to consider. Obviously, the research comes out very timely. The Public Commission is putting together its paper together on childhood, and it's had an issues paper out there. Just wanted to ask all three participants, and I might start perhaps with James and then come back to Julie and Frank. What do you think the implications are for policymakers, and in particular, officials as they look at the whole package? Obviously, governments are under a lot of pressure around their budgets. We know that. So what are the implications of these findings for officials as they consider the modelling, and in particular for policymakers perhaps outside the childhood sector who are probably more familiar with a lot of this information? James, could I get you to respond to that?
Sure. I think we made a lot of statements about what the future of the. Sorry, am I breaking up? I'm getting feedback here.
No, you're okay for me.
Okay. So in 2011, we outlined a vision for early childhood sector, and we recognised that it was fragmented, underinvested in. Didn't have the same sort of professional support and funding that maybe you saw in the school sector and beyond. If you look at the amount per head that's spent as you rise through the educational system, the early childhood sector does not get the main share of that. And so what the implications really are is let's stop and have a look at this at the sector from a landscape perspective. This is where the action is happening in the brain. Where we really need to wrap around quality services, particularly for the vulnerable. And yes, that has to be paid for, but we have to think of it not as a cost but as an investment. And that I guess our numbers are showing that if you make this investment, if you're willing to make this investment, that not only will it pay itself back in terms of government taxation over time, and it is a long period of time, but it also will benefit the whole economy. And so, I think the policy implications are pretty clear. You have to try and find a way to improve, the whole structure and viability and quality of this sector. I'm not saying that's going to be easy. I'm not saying there aren't competing choices. There are. I guess what I'm saying is I think this is one of the better investment options for government.
Sure. Thank you. Julie, I'll just come to you in a second. Frank, I might just get you to just look at your speakers there to see whether you could turn those down. I think that might be just giving you a little bit of feedback. Is it easy to do to turn down your speakers, maybe?
Okay. Is that better?
Maybe. That's my... if you like, online troubleshooting.
I don't have speakers. I'm just only the speaker in my laptop.
Oh, okay. And maybe Janelle as well. Just slightly turn down your speaker so there's not quite as much feedback. So thank you for that. It's the internet, and it's why we love it. So thank you very much. So just coming back to this question, then, James, thank you very much for that. Julia, your observations, just where this sits, I suppose, in the policy debate. You've been a veteran in the space for a while, seeing various reviews, etc. How do you think this research fits and the implications as people look at it?
Well, I like the three-pronged approach, and I would encourage the Productivity Commission to do its economic modelling around these three areas, not just to focus on the benefits of increased female workforce participation. The benefits to all children, the case around investing in human capital generally, and the benefits of increased participation of vulnerable children are significant, as we've seen from this research, and I think it's critical that the Productivity Commission look at all three. As far as officials go, I think officials need to continue to make the case. Otherwise, Australia will get left behind. We'll get left behind in terms of female workforce participation. If early learning and care is not made more affordable, we'll get left behind in the race to build human capital. And it's a critical part of our education system, as Frank said, and narrowing that gap later on is really, really hard. So why aren't we investing early? And we'll get left behind in the important work that needs to be done in terms of reducing disadvantage.
Right. Thank you. Frank, the roadmap that goes forward from here, let's assume people start acknowledging the data, etc., and the obvious case. What do you think the roadmap, what would you like to see the roadmap be in terms of, if you like, policymakers' response to this whole broad area?
Well, I think simply they need to acknowledge the research. I often say the research is so startling that you can't be exposed to the research about the importance of the early years and its implications, and particularly the implications of not getting those early years right, and continue business as usual. I think that we as a early years community have to do a better job of somehow translating that research so that people understand the importance of it. I know anecdotally that parents have endless discussions and debates about choosing a school or a high school for their child. And when it comes to childcare, all they care about is really access and cost. And all the research suggests that if we really want to make a difference just to educational outcomes, it's those early years where we really should be investing. So the most highly paid educators really should be in those early years because they can make the biggest difference. So we sort of have to somehow conceptually turn the whole thing on its head. But I think we have to get the message across to lay people, to policymakers, to the media, that childcare is not child-minding, that the first 3 or 4 years of life is not just simply a matter of parking your child, making sure he or she is safe, and then they emerge like butterflies when they start school and just start to learn. But those early learning environments are critical, and we have no choice but to invest in those years. So I think we have to do a better job around framing the message, around making it clear, and then giving governments very sort of simple's the wrong word, but practical recommendations for the steps that are necessary in order to make a difference. I think part of the whole issue with vulnerability and stressful situations for young kids is that there are often complex family situations. These are kids and families that often transcend any one discipline. So high-quality childcare is an absolutely critical part of the settings, etc. But we haven't been really good at taking these very complex issues, taking these very complex interventions and making them practical for government. I think we have to do better at giving governments a concrete list of recommendations that are achievable and reasonably affordable. And I think we're getting better at doing that, but we're not there yet.
Thank you very much.
If I could just say something here, it's also important to acknowledge how much governments have done over recent years. You know, governments got together nationally, state, territory, and the Commonwealth government, and really led what's called the national sort of quality agenda, and really that's been a fabulous fabulous world example of understanding to some degree this message and beginning to work on the things that need to be done. It's still a work in progress, and I think we should acknowledge that really a lot of the governments have done quite a bit, but there's more to do.
Yeah, I would agree, James. I think Australia's done very well. There's some wonderfully innovative early years policy at a federal and state level. I think it creates a very robust foundation from which now to build.
No, I agree, absolutely.
Thanks very much, Julia. I think that's probably a good position. James, I was just going to, conscious of our time and people's lunch times as well, just the last question, perhaps back to you, James, and a little bit where from your work you've done so far, what else would you like to do with this work in terms of what insights you've got from it, and where else you'd like to socialise it, I suppose, and get people looking at it?
So we funded this work ourselves, and because we felt it was an important issue, and so there's always a limitation on how much you can do. But we tried to get a really good idea of the benefits in those three areas. If we had the opportunity, I think what we'd like to do is do more work on looking at it from a real cost-benefit point of view. I think that would provide a lot of guidance for governments in how to roll this sort of thing out. I think it would also be really great that we largely relied on international evidence in relation to some of the settings in working out what these impacts would be. And while some of these international studies are great, it would be great to also have a local research base to be able to factor in and to see if the numbers do stack up. And I know some of these studies are underway, and we look forward to incorporating the results of those if we can in the future at some point.
Terrific. Well, look, thanks very much, everyone. I think we've done a good little excursion through the work, and it's really impressive work. For those who are interested, the report's available. Put up a link, and you can come back to this very page that you're looking at, and you'll see the reference to the work and to the links. One of the observations in the fiscal work that was done is that it's fiscally positive, i.e. that means that if you make these sort of investments based on the modelling, net it'll be an improvement to the fiscal situation of Australia. Now that's because you get higher taxes, higher revenue. So that's quite an interesting insight in its own right. And I think that's where James was starting to take us in terms of those cost-benefit analysis and get more precise there. But even on these crude numbers, it's a net win, which is a very interesting insight. I'd just like to go back and firstly thank Frank Oberklaid for being with us. Terrific having you here, and a pleasure, and great to have such an expert. Julia from Brisbane, thank you very much. Davison, CEO for Goodstart, and pleasure to have you here. And also James van Smeerdijk, who's been the sponsor and really the driver, I think, of this research. And a big thanks to the team from PwC who made it help come together. So this broadcast will be available now on demand. We'll send out the link, and it's available on this particular page. So thank you very much, and I'll throw up just a final slide here for more information for those who want to find the report. That's where it is. We've just shortened the link there, so bit.ly/PwC early childhood. Or you can get it from this very page, or if you're looking at it from YouTube, if you go to the PwC site or Google PwC early childhood, putting a value on early child education. So that's what we've been talking about today, the real value of it. And it's been great to have everyone here, so thank you very much.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Tom.